Humans are the ones that create suffering in the world. We harm one another. It's not our creator. We are not on autopilot. When you look at nature, you can see same-sex relationships in nature, in animals. I think people are born the way they're born. I honestly think most people do not care who you love and how you love. It's really just live your life and be a good person, and that's it. The perceived hypocrisy and behavior of religious people, and specifically the church. There's a lot of dumb things, terrible things, evil things that have been done in the name of religion, have been done in the name of God. Religion is just another thing that's weaponized. I understand why we hold religion to a higher standard. I understand that because that's supposed to be the point. But knowing that humans are corrupted, we're living in a fallen world, all of us are sinful, all of us have struggles and challenges that we have to deal with internally. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Brandon Ward, back with another episode of Order Within, episode 103. Today we're going to be talking about something I've been thinking quite a bit about. There's a lot of reasons that people reject Christianity, deny Christianity, and the philosophy / ideology / religion that is Christianity. I mean, there's some compelling reasons, and I wanted to talk about it because I think ultimately, as I'm going more into the Bible, deeper into the Bible in my study, and becoming very forthright in my faith, discipleship is a huge part of being a Christian. That's what Christ did with the apostles. He created disciples to go and share the word of the gospel. And I'm really taking up that mission and finding great peace and power in that mission. And I think a lot of people struggle with Christianity for a variety of reasons. So I wanted to record this episode to talk about some of those reasons, at least the top 5 reasons that I've found based on some research that I've done, and just discuss them and have some open thoughts about them and see if it might impact you, see if you agree with them, disagree with them, and if you find them helpful or if there's things that I've missed. So I'm going to start with number 5, the problem of evil and suffering. I've talked about this before, but not specifically, I think, from a Christian perspective. And a lot of people struggle with this, the fact that there is suffering and evil in the world. And the idea is if there's a loving, all-knowing God, why would there be suffering in the world? Why would there be evil in the world? Why would there be any kind of pain happening with a creator that is present and knowing what's happening? And if a lot of people can feel that way, I can understand that because there's a lot of suffering in our world. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of misery. A lot of us have gone through very hard things. And this has created friction in our minds because we feel abandoned, we feel misled, we feel mistreated. If God is real, then why would He allow His children to suffer and go through these things that we do on earth? Because as I mentioned in my last episode, earth is hard, it's hellish. And from a biblical perspective, we're living in a fallen world, so it's not really that surprising on why we suffer so much knowing that we're living in a fallen world and that this is challenging for us as faith-oriented people. But what does that mean about evil and good and suffering and not suffering? And for me, it comes back to free will. Full stop is that we have free will. Now, there's discussions and debates on the concept of free will. There's a lot of individuals that are very secular that believe there is no such thing as free will, and they cite studies and research that's been done around the notion that you can study the conscious and subconscious mind, and that answers, when prompted in these studies, can get registered as they're coming up through our subconscious mind before they reach the conscious mind. So the conclusions from those studies are that free will doesn't exist because we can register what's going to come into your conscious mind before it hits there. So therefore, it's the subconscious that's actually directing your life and not the conscious mind. So this gets into basically that we're operating on autopilot. It's our biology, it's our subconscious mind, all of these things controlling humans. because of these research studies. I find that to be very limited, and if anything, to me, the subconscious mind is just a deeper portion of the way our mind works, and it's a deeper portion of our mind. So registering something in the subconscious mind does not necessarily mean that it overrides our conscious mind or our free will. If we were conscious of everything, we would go insane. The subconscious exists for much of that reason. We're not aware of things happening, but it doesn't mean that they're not connected or that overrides free will. In fact, for me, it's just we're pulling that information from our subconscious mind. That's how the mind works. I think psychologically speaking, that's really well known and has been studied for decades now. So anyway, I'm getting a bit off subject here regarding that, because we're talking about evil and suffering as number 5 is the reason why people negate Christianity. And my response is free will, and that humans do these things. Humans make these choices. Humans are the ones that create suffering in the world. We harm one another. It's not our creator. We are not on autopilot. We're not being controlled in that sense. We have the ability to choose and operate and move in the world, and therefore can do both good and bad things. That is ultimately what makes the decision to be a good, forthright, loving person more powerful, because we have the ability to choose. If we just operated out of our subconscious and there was no selection, there was no choice in the matter, it wouldn't mean anything really, because you don't have the ability to decide whether you will do good or harm. And that decision is what defines us as beings, and loving beings and caring beings, and in particular, people of faith, Christians of faith, is we're in the world to do good, to do the Father's will, to follow Christ's lead, to live the way that He lived, and to operate from His model, which is one of understanding, compassion, truth, and love. So for me, the discussing of evil and suffering in the world is simply the fact that humans have free will and we do this to one another. God's not up there creating suffering intentionally because He's some cruel God. From my perspective, it's simply the fact that we are doing this to one another, and we've got to learn these things. We have to learn to use our free will. It's a huge responsibility to be a human and have the ability to make choices and to be a creator, to use our free will to create or destroy. That is how we learn to become more loving, caring human beings, is that we have to navigate the responsibility of free will. And so until we learn those things, until we learn to manage and navigate having a free will, evil and suffering will continue to exist in the world. It's an outcome of us negating that responsibility and having the ability to do that. Another reason is political alignment or political support with figures that may be associated with Christianity. Now, I think this happens a lot. I think people, again, it's kind of, I don't want to repeat myself, but a lot of this is going to tie into the free will argument, because ultimately people have the ability to choose. This is another example of that. People lump together people that consider themselves Christians and look at the things that they do in the world as a deterrent for them on why they won't support Christianity or don't believe in it, because people that they don't like or disagree with consider themselves Christians or are supported by Christians. There's examples. I think politically it's pretty straightforward, especially here in the U.S. I mean, if you're thinking about Christianity and then you're looking at what political candidates may be supported by certain movements, so like evangelists as an example, people would be deterred by the fact that many of the evangelists support right-leaning, conservative-leaning groups and politicians. So that's a reason that they negate political movements or they dismiss Christianity from that perspective, because it goes against the political components in our world. Again, there's validity to these points. All the things that I'm sharing, I could understand how people could come to these conclusions. I just don't agree with them. And so if in this example, having political disagreements based on someone's religious belief, it does make it challenging, because, I mean, ultimately anyone can believe whatever they believe, and you're going to have Christians on both sides of the aisle, especially here in the United States, of both Democrats and conservatives, Republicans. Connecting religion and religious belief to certain political figures can limit our ability to connect with our Creator and God in that sense. People dismiss religion and Christianity for that, and they often look at, even looking at the war in the Middle East right now that's happening there. A very religious-driven conflict based on what's happening there, and then when you add in the government surrounding that and all the things that are happening around that conflict, I can understand why people would shy away from those things. But the challenge is that as Christians, as faith-oriented people, we're in the world to focus on the spiritual aspects of that. Politics is earthly things. They are the earthly realm. And now we have to engage with them because that's a part of living on earth. They're a part of our earthly life. But we are called to be spiritual beings first. That is what we are told. That is the creative story that we've been shared in the Bible, and that we're on the earth as children of creation, children of God, here to live righteous lives, to show others the way by living and modeling a righteous way of life. So the political component can get dicey because ultimately anyone can get support from political candidates or get behind political candidates, but lumping that all together with one movement can negate the value that we can find in Christianity and religion in general when we just lump that with politics. Politics and religion really are two very different spaces. And politics is a earthly game. It's something we have to navigate, we have to manage here. But tying all that together from a spiritual perspective can be damaging if we allow it to be. And I think it's done that for a lot of people. I think it's blocking their ability to have progress in their faith or spiritual-based perspectives dependent upon political groups and their associated religious leanings. It can be dangerous if we're not mindful of that. The third reason is scientific and intellectual disagreements. This is a pretty prominent one as well. A lot of people cannot vibe or fall in line with religious thinking, Christian thinking, because of their belief in scientific theory. And for me, I've always been a science-oriented person. I've always enjoyed logic. I've always enjoyed research. I've always enjoyed learning about the world. This is one that I've struggled with personally. I don't think it's necessary that science and religion refute one another. In fact, I see them as two sides of the same coin. Science is the study of God's created universe, trying to understand how it functions. We can grow from that understanding and learning about science and how the world functions, learning of its laws, learning about gravity, where we're located in the universe, how energy works, how we've created electricity, we've learned to fly, we've created the internet, we've created all these incredible technologies because of our understanding of the natural world around us. That does not have to negate that we are a created species either. Something that and I have not yet seen these in the Bible, by the way. I've been reading the Bible. I haven't seen the only thing that I've seen in terms of creation and time is that God created the universe in 6 days. I have not seen that the earth is 6,000 years old or anything like that. So again, I could be wrong. I could get in there as I'm continuing on reading through the Bible. The only thing that I've seen is the story of creation, which talks about creating the universe in 6 days. And from my perspective, we have no idea what that means because ultimately 6 days to a creator could be anything. And in my mind as well, the law of evolution is simply a law that was created by our God. Believing in religion and seeing the theory of evolution does not negate one another. I see them go hand in hand. And people struggle with this because I think what can happen is people get very zealous about religious texts, the Bible, whatever it may be, and they only see that as truth. And I think that's where the challenge is, that they dismiss a lot of scientific theory. But there's nowhere does it tell us that we can't study the world around us. Again, I could be wrong. If I get there and I have to come back and say, oh, I was wrong, it actually says it in there, then I will. But to me, science is simply studying the world around us that God created. It doesn't negate his laws, his creation. And evolution is a very powerful component of that. We've had a lot of scientific truths, quote unquote, that have changed over time because we've learned about the world around us. And we used to, a long time ago, attribute things to curses, gods, all of these things, right? The rain, the weather, the sun, the moon, sickness, all of these things. We used to attribute a lot of that to God. But we've come to find that, people get sick. A lot of times maybe it's because, if something gets infected, as an example, there's an infection there. There's bacteria. We need to clean that. That's not God coming down and giving us an infection in that sense. I think sometimes people, and used to be that thought process. I think at one point humanity was a very basic, simplified view of the world. And I think when you read the Bible, especially starting in the Old Testament, you can understand that this is how people have tried to navigate the earth and try and live in a meaningful way where they are, where they find themselves. Like Moses is dealing with humans at the time that struggle with some very basic concepts of how to live. So having the 10 Commandments, having these laws that come into place are a way to help people operate and live more righteous lives, live godly lives. That is the call for us. The call is for us to live godly lives, to set ourselves apart from those that are not, so that we can live and teach other people. It doesn't negate those things. Religion has started with where it found itself with humanity and has changed and grown over time. But when you're looking at thousands and thousands of years ago, this is what humanity is dealing with. They're trying to get the basics right. And as a matter of fact, we're still working on the basics. We still are struggling with some of these basic laws that were shared with us many and many years ago in the beginning of the Bible, in the Old Testament. So we still have a lot to learn there. But science and study of the universe does not negate these truths. Like understanding that evolution can exist does not deny God's law. It's just a component of the universe that we're living within. So I think people struggle with these intellectual and scientific disagreements because they can't realize that they both can be a part of the same conversation. You don't have to negate all of that for science to exist. And I think that's my thing is in a world that will move forward and evolve and grow, both of those things, science and religion, must come together and work together to understand the universe that's around us, to understand the world that God created. But when you remove one or the other, things can get very problematic. The very least, morality is critical no matter what, right? Morality is critical no matter what. And I think most people would agree with that. We need some sense of moral right and wrong. And religion, in its early conception and as it continues on, is how to live right by God, by a creator. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. Reason number 2, the LGBT community. There's a lot of struggles around this. There's explicit language in the Bible that I've seen in the Old Testament that talks about homosexuality. Now, I don't agree with everything that I've read in the Bible, flat out. There's some things that are in there, the stoning, the way they determine people's punishments for certain things, like going against your parents. You should be potentially stoned to death. Some of that is really insane and intense. And when you look at nature, you can see same-sex relationships in nature, in animals. I think people are born the way they're born. I kind of think it's nonsense that it's a choice. And there's a lot of discrepancy in the religious community, which I understand. There's a lot of, honestly, really harsh things, praying away the gay, people that are trying to reform themselves because they're of their sexual nature and the judgment that can come from that. I can understand why people would be hesitant about it for 1,000%, because it's right there. It talks about homosexuality specifically. But in my mind, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking about the lifestyles and the way that people were living and have been living. In my mind, it's a warning not against same-sex love and relationships, but more so a warning against lifestyles, which is really about open sexual lifestyles. And in the gay community, it's well known that there's hypersexuality that can be very dangerous, in particular for men. So the homosexual component of that, if you're having a lot of unprotected, promiscuous sex, it can be very dangerous. So when I read these early writings in the Bible, to me, these are warnings against that. They're trying to protect us from understanding that if we're living hypersexual, hyper-promiscuous lives, it can be very damaging. But the cultural component, the weaponization of that early text around homosexuality has, I think, gone way overboard, and people have done really terrible things. I mean, you look in the Middle East, still a lot of these things are still happening. I think in modern America, this culture, most people really don't care. There's always going to be the select few that do and that are very passionate about it. But I think most people genuinely believe that if you love another person, you should be able to be with that person if it's built around love. Because ultimately, that's, again, the principles of Christianity is built around love and acceptance in that sense. And so that makes me a bit of an outlier, I think. I think most people, I will say this, I think most modern Christians don't care about this. There's extremism, obviously. That's the thing that always gets highlighted, is the extremism around the LGBT community. But I think it's unfair because I do not believe the majority of Christians think or feel that way. I honestly think most people do not care who you love and how you love. It's really just live your life and be a good person. And that's it. But people struggle with that, and they're going to look at all the extreme examples and say, hey, look, see, that's bad. That's why I could never be a Christian, or that's why I could never believe in this religion, is because look how they treat people like that. And I just think that that's an unfair assessment because, again, when you look at human history, the church has done some terrible things, and it's done some horrible things to people for a lot of variety of reasons. I'm not saying that's acceptable, but my point is the good that has been done and the message that Christ brings and the rules and law that were put there in the Old Testament were really about living moral and righteous lives. Did they get everything right? Some things I think are reflection of the older times and a way to try and teach people from more of a fear-driven way. But as we grow and evolve, love becomes more prominent because it's more effective. But back in the day, when these texts were written, I think fear was a very powerful way to teach people, and I think it was used in a way that was weaponized and is still used in this day. But when you look at the world, it's genuinely not the majority of Christians and people. And if you follow Christ and you follow those principles and you do your best to live by those principles and you're out in the world spreading the word of the gospel, nobody's going to care. And I think sometimes this specific piece is a way that opponents of Christianity can weaponize the past and weaponize these readings and use them as a way to dismiss Christian thinking and Christian philosophy, because it's an easy target, honestly. It's a low-hanging fruit. I think you have to look at the good and the bad, and in my mind, the good is far outweighed by some of the extremists that have leveraged these texts in a way that is fear-driven and hurtful to other people, and truthfully has ended people's lives, and that's not what it's about. At the end of the day, with the LGBT community, it's really about how you're living, and are you living right? Are you treating others with respect? Are you living with love? You can follow these principles. All is welcome in this community. That's the thing. Christ brought that. He changed the Old Testament and the New Testament that says, embrace Christ as your Savior, knowing that He is that God sent His only Son to die for us and the sins that have been waged upon this planet. He was the sacrifice that allows us to cleanse all that and move forward. That's it. Your sexuality is not going to stop you from doing that. If you can accept Christ into your heart and allow Him to lead your life, the sexuality component does not matter. Just more so, again, it's a reminder that the way we're living our lifestyle is something that we need to be cautious of. That's why marriage is so prominent in Christianity, because it's a way to live a more healthy and loving lifestyle. If we're out being promiscuous, whatever our sexuality is, it can be detrimental to our health and to our well-being. All right, so the last reason, this is the big one, and I think this is where most people come from, the perceived hypocrisy and behavior of religious people, and specifically the church. There's a lot of dumb things terrible things, evil things that have been done in the name of religion, have been done in the name of God through organized religion in churches. I'm not going to deny that. That's a reality. You can look back into history and see tons of terrible things that have been done. People getting burned at the stake. There's just a lot of violence that has been connected to religion. But my pushback is, again, that is a human trait. Religion is just another thing that's weaponized. I understand why we hold religion to a higher standard. I understand that because that's supposed to be the point. But knowing that humans are corrupted, we're living in a fallen world, all of us are sinful, all of us have struggles and challenges that we have to deal with internally. All of us can easily get swept away in a sinful life, being selfish, lying, deceitful, hurtful to other people, simply to get ahead in the world. That is not something that is only fallible to Christian-based people. All of us can get swept away in that self-centered way of living on earth. That's the point. We're living in a fallen world. And I understand why people look at that and say, oh, you're a hypocrite if you're in the church and you're doing these terrible things, or you're a pastor and you're doing these terrible things, or you're using that position to do terrible things. I agree. It's terrible to do that. But throwing out all of religion and all of the Christian faith and the message that Christ brings, because humans are manipulating, misleading, and lying others and using religion as a means to fulfill their own sick and twisted power struggles and whatever it is that they're trying to fulfill, it doesn't matter if it's religion or not. That's, to me, you're making a big mistake. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because the challenge is, and the problem has always been, the crux of our sinful nature on earth, the way we behave as humans. That was the original fall. The original fall was we took from the tree of knowledge, and now we're aware of good and evil. And so now we have to learn how to navigate that responsibility. Before we were innocent, we didn't know any of it. We fell into the earth, and now here we are. We're living in a material world. Our souls have been bound up in this material world because we have to learn about our spiritual nature and how to navigate the darkness that is now a part of us. It's a part of this world because we fell into it. So understanding that responsibility is our biggest thing. That's what we have to address. That's what we have to overcome, is the sinful nature that all of us must face. All of us has this within us. But will we be willing to work on it? Will we be willing to humble ourselves and pray to God and to follow Christ in his way of living and say, I'm going to be like you. I know that I am imperfect. I know that I am fallible. I know that I have made mistakes. I know that I have terrible thoughts. I know that I've done all of these things. But if I humble myself and I ask for forgiveness and I commit my life to Christ, and I will do everything in my power to live right to the best of my ability, that's all we can do. None of us are perfect. There was only one that was perfect, and that was Jesus. All of us are learning, are growing, are trying to make it work. I think, honestly, there should be a much higher punishment for people that do wrong in those positions. If you're a religious figure, if you're a religious leader, or you're in the church and you're using that position to abuse other people, the punishment should be far worse. And that's something else that I absolutely support, is we need harsher punishment in our society. There's not enough consequence for the crappy things that we do to one another. And in my mind, religion should have a higher standard for that. So if you're going to be abusive in the church, there's going to be a higher cost for you if you are ever caught doing these terrible things. So I can understand the hypocrisy that people feel, the resistance that people feel around religion and church because of the terrible things that people have done in God's name. I understand. You are right in your anger and righteousness. But all of this starts with ourselves. We only have control over who we are, how we treat others, and what we can do as individuals. If we don't live by a standard that we expect other people to live up to, then we're also hypocrites, regardless whether we're religious or not. And that's something I think that I struggle the most with, is that many people love to throw the hypocrisy component in the face of faith-oriented people, but they themselves are not living up to these standards that they are expecting others to live by, specifically religious people and Christians. And so calling out the hypocrisy all around matters. Hypocrisy is a scourge on human life. I can't stand it. It's something that I've got to watch out for and look for. I do my best to operate and live by these principles every day and treat others with respect as much as I can. I fail a lot. I have a temper, I'm fiery, I get angry about things. I do a lot of things that is imperfect, but I strive every day to get better, to learn, to grow, and to be of service to our Creator to wherever I can. If we embody those principles of Christianity, the things that Christ taught us, we can live much more loving, fulfilling lives, and the world will be a better place. I do not think the world will be a better place without religion. The John Lennon song that all the celebrities were singing during the lockdowns, I don't think, imagining a world without religion is absurd. There would still be things to fight over. People would still fight. The idea that you get rid of religion and then all of a sudden there's going to be peace is nonsense, because there's so many wars that have happened in the world that are not religious at all. At all. And in fact, in the last 100 years and a little more, lots of genocide has happened that's not related to religion. Mao wiped out millions of people, and it wasn't religious based. He was the one that he wanted to be worshipped. So there's countless examples of this when we study history that show us that there's a lot of terrible things that happen, not just in the name of religion. So I do think it's unfair to hold that standard. I understand why people do it, but to ignore all the other atrocities that happen in human history and only look at the things that have been done hypocritically in the name of religion or God is unfair. And it limits all of us, and it limits our progress. I think that's, for me, the biggest thing about this is, how can we progress? How can we move forward in the world as it is today? And it comes with learning to be accepting, learning to live truly to these principles and do our best to operate at a higher standard. And as Christians and faith-oriented people, we are called to operate at a higher standard. That's the reality of it. And that's also what inspires me to want to be a Christian, to want to do those things, is we are called to live a different life. We are called to set ourselves apart. That's what God has for us. That's the vision that He sees for us. That's why we're in the world, is to be disciples and to share the message of Christ so that we can help others come to our Creator and find that salvation that comes with embracing Christ as our Savior. Because ultimately, it's embracing the eternal life that lives within all of us, that is there for all of us. But it comes through Christ and comes through embracing our Creator and allowing Him to lead our life. Ultimately, that's why we're here. And that's what makes being a Christian so powerful and so forthright and so fulfilling, because the mission is moral. It's not material. It's spiritual. And that is what makes it unique. And we live in a heavily driven material world. So, what do y'all think about that? Did I miss anything? Are there other reasons you think people turn away from Christianity and living a faith-oriented life? I think one bonus would be, for me, is that it's hard to live a life like this. It's hard to live by a higher standard. It's much easier to just fall in line with a material-driven world and rally around making money and being successful and doing all that. I think it's much easier to fall in that line because that's the way most people do it. So it's a lot harder to live a faith-oriented life, to live a higher standard, to live close to God, to do these things. It requires more sacrifice. So I can understand why people dismiss religion, so that they can ultimately dismiss the higher standard that's required to come with that way of living, with being a faith-oriented person. So I understand why people dismiss these things. And it's a way to justify living the life that you do and feel righteous and just in your own way of living by dismissing morality and religious-based living. So I can understand why people negate it and step away from it, but I just, you're selling yourself short. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to mislead ourselves, to make ourselves feel better about the way we're living, even though in our heart of hearts, we know what's right or not. Because at the end of the day, there is right and wrong in the world. There is. And that's what God tells us. That's what morality is about. That's what religion is about. It's ultimately there is a right and wrong. And there is a right and wrong way to do things. And there's a right and wrong way to live from God's perspective. I don't think people like that. I think people struggle with that idea. So I can understand why people dismiss Christianity and religion in general, because it's a way to not honor that higher standard that we're called to live. So let me know what you think. Love to hear any comments. If you are new to the channel, I'd love to have you stick around. Make sure you hit that subscribe button there. I post on Twitter, X. I also have a Substack, so you're welcome to join there. Got my YouTube channel here. I'm also on all the podcast platforms that you listen if you're audio only. So with that being said, until next time, y'all.